All right, everyone, we are just about at 5:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with just some housekeeping notes. My name is Elizabeth Brady. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the Director of Sexual and Interpersonal Violence Prevention at the State University of New York. Before we begin, sessions are being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants afterwards. Closed captioning is available for this session. If you select the closed captioning button at the bottom, that should be able to work. And finally, while we were disappointed that we were unable to be with everyone in person, we are hoping that we can increase participation and a sense of community in a few different ways. First, Q&A is available for this session. So if questions come up along the way, feel free to submit them to today's panelists. And I'm sure that they'll be really excited to answer them during their designated Q&A time. Second, use the hashtag SUNY Spectrum on social media and be featured on our social media wall. Connect with other colleagues from across the United States and Canada who are also in attendance at this conference. And finally, we do have a Workspace by Facebook group. In an effort to create an ongoing dialogue and greater sense of community, we've created this group where folks can connect with one another, share their thoughts and ideas. If you haven't already joined the group, feel free to send us an email at spectrum@suny.edu and we'll send you an invitation right away. With that, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Gemma Reinford, who will be formally convening today's session.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gemma Reinford. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the director of the Student Conduct Institute. The Student Conduct Institute trains individuals nationwide at public and private institutions of higher ed on how to fairly and equitably investigate and adjudicate conduct violations and disclosures. That includes disclosures of sexual and interpersonal violence. I'm very happy to convene this session, Making Your Title IX Practices More Inclusive, the intersection of Title IX and LGBTQ+ support. The Student Conduct Institute is proud to count today's speakers as members of the SCI, and we are very much looking forward to their presentation. Addressing this intersection can have a direct impact on student conduct proceedings related to Title IX cases, and we know sexual violence impacts our LGBTQIA+ communities disproportionately. It is with that, I'm very pleased to formally welcome as presenters to Spectrum 2020, Emma Morcone, Title IX Coordinator and LGBTQ Coordinator at SUNY New Paltz, and Nikki Herman, Chief Diversity Officer and Title IX Coordinator at Alfred State College.
Great, thank you so much, Gemma. We're really excited to be here tonight and welcome all of you to this virtual space. Nikki and I are really excited for our presentation tonight. My name is Emma Morcone. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the LGBTQ Coordinator and Title IX Coordinator at SUNY New Paltz.
And welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. While it is disappointing that we cannot be in Albany, we definitely appreciate you signing on to join us. As Gemma had said, my name is Nikki Herman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer and Title IX Coordinator at Alfred State College. And I'm also the SUNY Title IX Coordinator Association Vice President, President-elect.
Great, so just to give you a sense of what we are going to be discussing, what we are going to be talking about today, here's a quick look at our agenda. Nikki and I are going to take some time to introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about our background, what makes us passionate about the work that we do. We're going to talk to you a little bit about some tips and takeaways that you can bring back to your institution or organization. One of my favorite parts of conferences is concrete things that I feel like I can take back to my home campus and really institute. And we want to make sure that you have something concrete to draw upon throughout the presentation today. We're going to talk a little bit about LGBTQ inclusivity in your campus or organization, spending a lot of time on that intersection of trauma in the LGBTQ+ or queer community. We'll talk about some best practices in your Title IX intake process with the LGBTQ+ community and talk about some action steps that you can take of allies to the community or allies to survivors of sexual and interpersonal violence.
Yes, and I told Emma before we started, as we were reviewing our slides, I said, I'm well aware that we're breaking PowerPoint 101 protocol here with having a lot of text on slides, but we know that these are going to be shared out, and we know that you're coming to the session in particular to be able to have things that you can like Emma said, take away and build into your process. So we recognize that some of the slides are text heavy, but we want you to have the information at your hands and ready to plug into your practices.
We also want you to feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll have some designated slides kind of after each section. You'll see literally questions pop up. So feel free to submit questions at any time, but we'll stop periodically throughout the presentation to answer those questions. So feel free to ask us questions. We want you to feel as engaged as possible in this virtual space. So a little bit about me and the work that I do and why Nikki and I felt like we wanted to provide this presentation at SUNY Spectrum. I have a really unique position at SUNY New Paltz where I am both the Title IX coordinator and the LGBTQ coordinator. And I think one of the biggest benefits of being in both arenas is students often feel really comfortable coming forward to report to me because they feel confident that I am going to take the report in a really affirming way that affirms their identity, gender identity, and or sexual orientation. And Nikki and I have chatted a lot about how other Title IX practitioners can make sure that students and employees and folks who are coming forward to them can be confident in the process that's at stake, right? Can be confident as you as a practitioner that you aren't going to misstep or mistreat someone based upon their gender identity or sexual orientation. I'm an out and proud member of the LGBTQ+ community, and I think that also is really important. And I try to share that with my students as well, so they know that I can relate to some of the experiences that they are sharing with me.
Awesome. And I'm Nikki Herman, she, her, hers again. And the work that I do again at Alfred State is I act as the Chief Diversity Officer and as the Title IX coordinator. So having inclusive intake processes and inclusive Title IX protocol and investigations is really something that is near and dear to my heart. I've had a passion for diversity work and for Title IX work and empowerment for a very long time. So I'm honored to be able to serve in both capacities and bring what I'm passionate about in my personal life into the work that I do. I too consider myself to be part of the LGBTQ+ community. And Emma and I were just having this conversation because I feel like I'm a very good person for students to come to when they're struggling with labels and feel like they have to choose from the ever-growing and numerous labels that we have for gender and sexuality when they're questioning and they're trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in this community. So I guess not straight is where I have landed, and I find that to be always a very interesting conversation. I think students are always looking to have a conversation like that with somebody who understands how important or not important labels are. So I'm proud to be that person that can have that contact and communication and connection with them very much so, and bring that to the Title IX process should that be something, and we'll get into that in a little bit, something that students are looking to talk about when they're disclosing incidents of sexual or interpersonal violence, for sure.
So we always like to emphasize the importance of pronouns and some general best practices. And while we won't spend a lot of time on this evening, especially for those of you who may have been some of the previous sessions at SUNY Spectrum, you probably already know a lot of this information, but still it's important to reaffirm some of pronoun best practices. And I also always, as I mentioned before, like to give folks other ideas of how to make this process a little bit easier for them. And by process, I mean incorporating the use of pronoun usage in your everyday work and feeling more comfortable with they, them pronouns. A lot of people, when they're really struggling, when they're first starting to become acclimated to using pronouns, really don't know where to begin, or sometimes don't know how to start the conversation, or are afraid to start the conversation because they don't want to accidentally offend someone. And my best tip is to mirror that language, right? Introduce yourself like Nikki and I did, hi, I'm Emma, use she, her pronouns, right? So that person or people that you are meeting with might offer up that information. It's also okay to ask for someone's name or pronoun. You never want to assume. That's the biggest thing. You don't want to make an assumption about someone's gender or gender identity based upon their gender expression. You never want to make that assumption. I always think if you are not in a space for some reason where you can ask for someone's pronouns, maybe, you know, you are giving a talk in a space like this to over 1,000 people, right? And you aren't able to ask for everyone's individual pronouns, get more comfortable and get more acclimated with using gender neutral pronouns, with using they, them pronouns instead of assuming someone's gender based upon their name or how they look to you physically.
So now it is time for our first poll. So do you currently list your pronouns in your email signature? Please take a moment and answer yes or no. Ooh, so 70% of our friends online are using pronouns in their email signature. And 30%, I feel like a game show host, and 30% are not. So as Emma mentioned, I think that pronouns in your email signature is one of the easiest and yet most visible ways that you can let somebody know that you are in office, you are an individual who understands gender expression, gender identity in a pretty quick and easy way. Moving along. So being able to normalize pronoun use, I'm not going to go through, you know, everything, but definitely introductions. I think especially when you're presenting in front of a group of people or a class for the first time. I know that there's some faculty on here, and I do teach several classes. And one of the things that I do is I have a handout, and it's kind of a get to know you for my students. And it says, you know, the very first things is your preferred, what you prefer to be called in the class and the pronouns that you use. So right from the start, I'm not going to be using the roster that's provided to me. I'm going to be asking the student to let me know the name and pronouns in which they would like to be referred to. And then of course, email signature.
Yeah, and I think that's always like the easiest thing to do, right? That's always an easy change to make, and oftentimes it's at the bottom of your signature, right? So folks who are there who notice it, it'll be really important to them, but it's not something that's going to take away from the rest of your email signature. People are still going to find your phone number. They're still going to find your office location.
I have noticed that there's been people that also can that also link to what are pronouns and why are they important. There's a website that provides that answers too. So if that's something that you're looking for, we can certainly provide you with that link as well. I think it's helpful if you're in a space where possibly pronouns aren't something that are announced or talked about on the regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're able to, I know some institutions or some organizations have aligned to print pronouns on name tags. I think that's also really great. Even if it's not like a metal name tag, if you have like the paper ones, just start normalizing the practice of, you know, writing your pronouns underneath.
Definitely. Business cards too, again, are another quick and easy way to feature your pronouns as well.
As we are learning and navigating how to do things virtually, right? So much of our programming and teaching classes or having meetings is done through video platforms. Try to familiarize yourself with these various video platforms. I find that Zoom makes it very easy to edit your pronouns and to type it in after your name. Sometimes, like for example, so Nikki and I are logging onto this as like a guest, right? To a presentation mode, but you can still edit your pronouns. I know my campus uses WebEx, and it's a little bit more challenging. You have to like go to your profile and edit it in. But if you are able to have that option, I think that's also a really good practice and something that is pretty quick and easy. Definitely.
And again, too, on your syllabus statement, if you would like a sample syllabus statement, I'm happy to provide that with you. But I have built one into mine that has the chosen and preferred name policy as well as preferred pronouns. That's me advancing the slide. So poll number 2. So which of these resources, and you can check all that apply, please, do you have at your institution or organization? And we have Safe Spaces, Safe Zone, LGBTQ Student Clubs, LGBTQ Employee Resource Group, Gender Inclusive Housing Options, Gender Inclusive Restrooms, and LGBTQ Mental Health Resources.
And I will also say with these polls, there's no shame whatsoever. They're anonymous. We just like to take the pulse of the room to see where everyone is at in terms of their institutional inclusivity.
Ooh, okay.
Wow.
So we have 69% of our online friends are having Safe Spaces, Safe Zone. 81%, that's great, have LGBTQ student clubs. 37 with employee resource groups. 50, so half of us have gender inclusive housing options.
That's very
82,
impressive.
that's amazing. Yeah, gender inclusive restrooms. And then 55%, again, more than half, so that's great, have LGBTQ plus mental health resources. That is pretty
Awesome.
great. So we're going to take a couple minutes, and Emma's going to kick us off with diving into some of these and why they're important on your campus.
Yeah, and I'm gonna focus in on really two things as I'm going through the checklist. I want to focus on why this is an important resource for the campus, but more importantly, quick tips and tricks of how, if you don't currently have these services on your campus or with your organization, some ideas or thoughts of how you might go about getting that started and what that might look like in the different spaces. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll break down each of these things that are on the poll. And again, I do recognize that this is a little text heavy, but we want to give you something to take away after the presentation, especially folks who are not joining us live as well. So Safe Zone or Safe Spaces, sometimes called allies programs, there's a lot of different names. So these are important for a lot of reasons. Oftentimes with these safe zone or safe space trainings, there's some sort of like physical component, like a sticker or a list that's published online of all the folks who have attended the training, some sort of visible component that these certain group of people have dedicated some time to these very important issues on the campus, right? And I think that's important. It sets a certain tone for inclusivity. And even if it's a small scale initiative to begin with, where you're only able to offer trainings to select groups of people, I think it's definitely worth exploring. Oftentimes there's multiple folks on your campus who are more than qualified to help you facilitate or co-facilitate these sessions. LGBTQ student groups, and same thing with employee groups, it's important for both students and employees to feel like they have a welcoming space, to feel like they are a part of the campus community. And a lot of times we do a lot of focus work with our students, but our employees also need to feel welcomed on our campus as well, right? And that's so important for retention on both the student and employee side. And obviously we know what LGBTQ student clubs might look like, right? That might be a little bit different, but the employee resource groups or employee gatherings, right? It can be just as simple as, a group of LGBTQ plus identified employees meeting once a month off campus to grab some food, right? It can be as informal as that, but just something to make employees, especially new employees, feel like they're tied to your campus community.
Can I just quickly add into that, because we do have an employee resource group for employees and faculty and staff on our campus. We call it IN, and we have had some like happy hours. We like to call it IN Goes Out, which is also cute. But so Alfred, if you haven't been there, I hear a lot of people say like, oh, my campus is very rural, and I'm always like, come to Alfred. I will show you rural. We have one stoplight that we throw a party for every 5 years for. So we're in a pretty contained community, and the employee resource group for LGBTQ folks really lets people know that there is that community here, and there's that ability to ask questions like, is this going to be a friendly place for my wife and I, or my husband and I? Are daycare centers around here LGBTQ plus friendly? Is there space where I can pick up my faith and I'm going to feel like me and my family is welcome. So it gives that community within the community that I think people are looking for when they're looking to make a big move and relocate their family, especially to some of our smaller campuses within New York State and certainly across the country.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. I think there's a lot that goes into gender inclusive housing options. There's a lot of different components here. When you're talking about gender inclusive housing options, it can mean LGBTQ specific themed housing, right? Where there's literally a wing or an area in a residence hall that is specific for LGBTQ plus students, right? That's one example. Or it can be gender inclusive in terms of bathroom usage, right? Maybe it's suite or quad style hall where, you know, all participants have opted into a gender inclusive housing option, gender inclusive shower facilities versus bathroom facilities, and what that might look like for your campus. Another important thing we always like to be mindful of, whether or not you have gender inclusive housing options, is to think about how your residence life staff handles door tags. A lot of times students may want their chosen or preferred name on a door tag, but they may only be out on a college campus. They may not be out to their friends from home or their family from home. And how does that work? How can that be navigated? I know sometimes it's a really good practice to offer 2 door tags so that they can have their dead name or their legal name in case their family is coming to visit, but then they can have their chosen or preferred name up for the majority of the time, so they're not accidentally outed in some way. And of course, gender inclusive housing is important to make a student feel included, but it's also about genuine safety, especially when we're discussing bathroom usage. And going on gender inclusive restrooms, I think thinking about how many are on your campus, where you are able to put gender inclusive restrooms based on coding laws, depending on what state you reside in, right? And it's not just for our trans and non-binary students, although of course that's why we're all gathered here today, right? There's a lot of inclusive benefits to having gender inclusive or all gender restrooms. When we talk about LGBTQ mental health resources, obviously we all know that LGBTQ students as well as other marginalized students have a different set of needs, might be suffering more statistically from things like anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation based upon their gender identity or sexual orientation, history of bullying, etc. So even if your area is not able to provide LGBTQ specific support groups or trans specific support group, is there a way to ensure that your mental health staff is appropriately trained? What is available in the local area if a student wants to begin their transition? Is there a counselor or therapist in the area or even on your campus that is able to support them through that process? And we have our next.
We do have our next poll, super exciting. Okay, so we are going to continue on with the institutional checklist. So which of these resources do you have at your institution? Again, multiple choice, check all that apply. Chosen or preferred name policy, LGBTQ plus friendly conduct teams, trans inclusive healthcare, LGBTQ plus coordinator or a professional position that's dedicated to this population, or an LGBTQ plus center or diversity center on your campus.
Wow, great.
Okay, look at this. 87% with a chosen and preferred name policy, 30% with LGBTQ plus friendly conduct teams.
And we're going to be talking a lot about that when we talk about inclusive sexual assault practices. So that's good.
Trans inclusive healthcare, 27%, 41% with an LGBTQ plus coordinator or professional position, and then 59% with a center or a diversity center. That's great. Okay, so we're going to move right along here. I highlighted chosen name. I feel that that's definitely, when we talk about inclusivity, being, you know, the best possible way, but if preferred name policy also works as well. We think of it as the student has chosen to be called this. They don't just prefer it. It's not a preference. If you have the capability in Banner, we were just told, you know, we can add pronouns, making rosters with your chosen names, not only available just to your academics, but I think about your res hall folks, like we talked about with the door tags in the room rosters. But recently we have been made. I added the dining portion into it last night because so many of our campuses are trying to navigate how to get students safely their food during this interesting time of COVID-19, that a lot of our campuses have gone to like an online app where you can order your food and you can pick it up and they, Nikki, order for Nikki. And because of the way that some of our ID cards are set up, well, we have the capacity to add the student's chosen name onto the ID card because there's legal tender associated with it, money and stuff. So that has to be, their legal name has to be on there, and the students are understanding of that. But in this new era, things are being announced publicly, and a lot of students are hearing their dead names in spaces where they don't want to be. So I've worked with my dining and my auxiliary services, and they're going to be looking into how to rectify that so our students don't have to experience that when they go to pick up their food. And I know Emma was going to talk about Grubhub.
Yeah, so some of your campuses or organizations might be using third-party vendors like Grubhub or Tap and Go or Tapingo. So on my campus, I've just tried to post instructions for how students can change it on their own app on their phone, so that they know that choice or that preference is theirs. And I think that's important because maybe a lot of students don't realize that they have that ability, and they might not too, right? Depending on the service that you're using, but definitely something to look into.
Right. So we have LGBTQ friendly conduct terms and teams apparently today. So all of it involves conduct, and all of it, and it all focuses on the same area. So the very first thing that we did at Alfred State is we looked at removing binary language in our policies, our code of conduct, and on our website. So you would be surprised when you take a look at your policies, how many times you have she, her, he, his, she, he written in your code of conduct. And I also think about when you are presenting, particularly at orientation to parents and guardians, how many times you say your son or daughter will be coming onto our campus, and trying to move away again from that binary language to say your child or your student. And I go back to that with the gender inclusive restrooms. Being inclusive has a farther reach than just the LGBTQ plus population. So when you use language like your child or your student, you're also including those students who are in foster care, those students who may be in the care of their aunt or uncle, or maybe having an older sibling usher them into the college process who may not have parents with them. So that inclusive language is really important. Making sure that your conduct violations are phrased and enforced in a way that is inclusive and mindful that all sexual assault is not heteronormative. So all sexual assault does not include just penetration of the penis and the vagina, that there's a lot more that goes into that if you're a part of the queer community that's outside of just that idea of traditional sex. Do you have hearing boards or hearing advisors now with our new Title IX regulations who are specifically trained to work with LGBTQ plus folks? So I think that's really important if a student is looking to have somebody who could potentially be cross-examining somebody, that they are aware of terminology, that they're aware of anatomy, that they are aware of gender expression and identity and sexual orientation. So all of those are things to consider. And if not, can you work with your chief diversity officer, or can you work, if you are one of those lucky percentages that have someone like Emma on their campus, can you work with them to get some more training for those hearing advisors? And then again, modifying your forms to be more inclusive. So when you have intake forms, are your forms asking for chosen or preferred names? And do they have more than just the gender binary or that male, female, other? So trying to really expand your offerings there so people feel like they're represented and seen in your intake forms, and they're not just being labeled as other. Moving along to trans-inclusive healthcare, looking at your college's medical staff, are they trained to work with the needs of trans students? Or do you have safe places locally where students can get their hormone treatment that is safe and legal, and it's not coming to them on the internet where the dosage isn't correct? or they're not quite sure exactly what they are getting. And then safe and caring mental health care for students in transition. It's such a fragile time, and finding the right person to help steward somebody through that transition is really critical. So making sure that your counseling center is going to be up to date on the latest terminology and ways in which to assist students through this process.
And I'll just jump in here quickly, just
please.
To mention regarding trans-inclusive healthcare, talk to your health center and the staff over there to see exactly what they are able to provide and what they're able to do to support students. Oftentimes, things like hormone therapy is included under specialty care, so perhaps your health center isn't able to provide that, but their nurses or other staff may be able to help the student with the actual injection should they have them. So try to figure out what exactly your health center can and can't do, and have those conversations, and try to familiarize yourself with what's in the area, who can provide that care off campus for your students if you can't offer it on.
Definitely. And I want to also provide a note for our more geographically challenged friends like myself. What we have done at Alfred State is we have a transport team. So we have a student Senate funded team of students who, for $20 or $25 will drive students to or from medical appointments. So we work with our local Planned Parenthood, and that transport team will help take the students up there. So we're ensuring that they get the safest and the best care. And because we have no taxis, we have no Ubers, like really come to Alfred, I'll show you a lot of cows. But we don't have things that you would find in a more urban area. So we're trying to do the best that we can to link our students up to make sure that they're getting safe and caring health care. And then our LGBTQ plus professional. And I wanted Emma to take this bullet point because that is what she does.
Yeah, so I think advocating for the need on your campus to have an LGBTQ professional, I think it's great if it's someone who's full-time, but depending on the needs of your campus, if you're coming from a smaller institution, if you're able to tack it on to, I'm split, I'm Title IX coordinator and LGBTQ coordinator. So depending on the side and need of your campus, I'm SUNY New Paltz's first LGBTQ coordinator. This position was created back in 2016. So it's the first time that we had, a position like this. And it was something that I strongly advocated for. Being a double alum of New Paltz and working in other professional capacities, I definitely saw the need on our campus and was able to demonstrate the need in terms of all the things that our campus could offer if we had a dedicated professional to be able to support those initiatives, and talking to our administrative and campus leaders about those needs and seeing what you can do to advocate for that. And I say that also acknowledging the extreme budget crises that most of our institutions are facing due to COVID-19. So I recognize how untimely this advice is, but I also at the same time, I want to provide you context for how a campus like New Paltz was able to, have a position like this one.
And really quickly, and this piggybacks off of the Q Center and the Diversity Center, that space that's dedicated to growth and support and development for not only the LGBTQ plus students, but it's a resource for campus and for professionals that are looking to learn more about this. If you are in a budget crisis, if you aren't, I should say, kudos to you. You tell us how to do it, but I know that most of us are. So there are certainly still ways to resource. While you may not be able to get a full-time professional, I do think that there are a lot of students that are looking for internships that are really passionate about this topic. If you have any local schools or at your own school that have graduate students, certainly they would be a fantastic fit to work with your chief diversity officer or your multicultural director in this space. But also one of the ways that we have been able to get a lot of resources is through our institutional advancement and being able to get the donations of alum to support some of the things that we do. We're lucky enough to have an endowment from former First Lady of Alfred State who started our Rainbow Union. Their family continues to give every year in her memory. So we're able to provide opportunities and grow our library and grow our resources. So if you work with your institutional advancement folks, that could be another way for you to potentially reach out. I know that we have a lot of LGBTQ plus alum that would be probably happy to give back to the school if they knew it was going directly to support other LGBTQ plus students. I have very interesting ways of finding money professionally, but not personally. So if you're ever looking for some tips professionally, I'm your person. So now we're going to take some questions, and I did see some coming in. I just have not taken a look at them. So I wasn't sure.
I was taking a look while you were speaking, so I can dive in, Nikki, and we'll talk about some of these. There'll be other times that we'll answer questions. So some of these questions we might revisit. Someone asked, can you break down the line of being affirming while not advocating? It's such a fine line. I agree, and we're definitely going to talk about more specific inclusivity and intake processes and how to be affirming in the Title IX realm when working with LGBTQ students. So I'm going to table that question, and hopefully we can answer that. Do you have online etiquette for professors regarding pronoun usage? Absolutely. I think it's hard to answer this without knowing your class setting. Are you online? Do you teach large lecture style classes? But I think wherever you can provide the opportunity for a student to share their pronouns if they feel comfortable in a way that's not going to single a student out, right? If you have a class of 30 and you're able to have students go around the room and introduce themselves, say their name, their major, their hometown, and their pronouns, lumping it in with something else to kind of normalize that, that practice, but also being mindful as the instructor to take note of those pronouns, because it's one thing to ask for the pronouns. We really have to be mindful about our inclusivity to make sure if we're taking the time to ask the question that we're going to honor our students' requests and make sure that we are, going to be able to be respectful of that student.
And I think doing it on the first day. So if you have a larger class, or this may not be what you're comfortable in, it might not be your wheelhouse. I think just saying welcome everybody. I want everybody to feel as welcome and safe as they can in the classroom. This is an invitation for you to email me offline if you have a chosen name or preferred name or pronouns that you would like me to use. Please, here's my email and let me know. And that just immediately sets the tone for the students in your class that you're somebody who cares about this and you're somebody who wants to know.
I'm looking through some of the other questions. Feel free to hop in, Nikki, as well. What do you do if your institution is consistently pushing off inclusive practices or resources? Yeah, this is a tough one, and I certainly know what it's like to, fight against people who aren't as mindful about these practices or don't understand the importance. I think for me, the biggest piece of advice is find your allies in the space. Identify people who want the same goals, who value inclusivity the way that you do, in terms of being on the same page of the needs of the institution. And I think it's so much easier when you have a team or a task force of people who are fighting against that person or that idea, as opposed to you just fighting the battle alone, because that's also very mentally exhausting for you as a human. I don't know if you have anything to add to that one, Nikki.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say find concrete examples, because people are going to, when they're fighting against it, they're going to want the reason why. So I would say one of the very first things I would do is look and see if diversity, inclusion, equity, any of that is in your institution's core values, mission statement, principles of community standards, and reflect that. Like, these are the standards that we've agreed to live by. We need to demonstrate how we're putting these into practice. And I think the other thing is retention. Like, retention is huge. So if you can work with your brilliant people who do data on your campus and look at those kind of things, like, retention is going to be huge. So any students that are feeling like they might be underrepresented and those numbers are lower, everybody's trying to keep students at their campus on a good day, much less in COVID-19. So being able to say, the more inclusive we are, the more people are going to feel not only like they're welcome, but they belong at our campus. And that's what's going to make them stay. That's what's going to, make them tell all their friends that, Alfred State or New Paltz or wherever you are is a great and a safe place to be. And that's also going to turn them into alumni that care about your institution and want to give back. So it's really a win-win-win for everybody. So I would look at ways that you can demonstrate that inclusivity turns into, unfortunately, money, because it you know, that's where we're at right now. And that's definitely, we didn't all get into this for the money, let's be honest. But I mean, it does matter when students, you know, don't feel safe on campus, they're not going to stay, and everybody wants their retention numbers up, for sure.
I agree. I think maybe I'll quickly answer one more, and then I think we should move on for time purposes. But we'll definitely have other. We'll definitely get to more questions later throughout the presentation. So don't feel like we're ignoring you or dismissing you. But I did want to address quickly, while we're on the topic of pronouns, do people take offense if you choose not to disclose your pronouns? So I would just counter with, it depends on why you're not including your pronouns. You never want to put a student or a person in a place where they feel that they have to out themselves in an environment that is not going to be inclusive, that is not going to be friendly. But if you are choosing not to, you as the instructor are choosing not to model or share your pronouns because you're not comfortable talking about pronouns yet, then I think that's something you definitely want to revisit and kind of rework on. Anything you want to add, Nikki?
No, I think that's perfect.
Perfect. So I think we should just move on. We can come back to some of these questions later in the presentation.
You got great questions too.
Yeah. So we're going to show you a clip of a video. Some of you may have seen it. It's called Vanessa Goes to the Doctor. And although this video takes place in a healthcare facility, it's about a trans-identified person who is visiting the doctor, which you'll eventually see. Although it takes place in a medical facility, a lot of the things that you'll see in the video are very applicable to the work that we do here, right? You're going to see things like forms that apply to our work. You'll see things like how reception area or that first impression, things that we hang up on the walls, all these things that can be translatable to the work that we all do.
I'm really nervous about this appointment. I haven't been to a doctor in years. But finally, I have health insurance. I chose Dr. Miller because he is in my network, but I don't know anything about him.
As a transgender woman of color, Vanessa Shepard has had mixed experiences with doctors and hospitals in the past. But it's the bad ones which stand out in her mind today. So she enters the office with trepidation. Immediately upon entering, she begins to scan the environment for clues. Will she be welcome here? Will she be safe? Do the posters reflect a diverse patient population? Is there a non-discrimination policy posted? No, there is not.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Shepard. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Dr. Miller.
Looks like this is your first time here. Please fill out all the pages on this form. Bring it back to me when you're finished.
Thank you.
Intake forms are a powerful and early indicator of the safety and welcome LGBT people can expect in a healthcare setting.
What am I supposed to do here? Do I have to lie, or how truthful can I be? Name? I'm just putting Vanessa. Sex? Only 2 choices? I hate this. I guess I have to check mail, the sex on my insurance card. Relationship status. With these options, I guess I have to choose only single.
Thank you. Can I have your insurance card, please? I have to make a photocopy of it. You can have a seat and I'll call you. Would you come here, please? You gave me the wrong insurance card. This one says Robert Shepard.
I used to go by Robert Shepard, but now I'm Vanessa Shepard.
So Robert is your real name, and that's the one we're going to have to use. Have a seat. The doctor will call you.
Mr. Shepard? Mr. Shepard?
That's me.
called for Mr. Shepard. You are?
I'm Vanessa Shepard.
Okay, come in.
Vanessa is humiliated. Now let's see how it could be done better. Vanessa scans the walls upon entering the waiting room and immediately spots a non-discrimination policy, and yes, it includes both gender identity and sexual orientation.
A rainbow sticker, yes. Oh, and they have the advocate? Great. Hi, my name is Vanessa Shepard. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Dr. Miller.
Oh, looks like this is your first time here. Please fill out all the pages on this form and bring it back to me when you're finished.
Thank you.
It's immediately clear that this intake form reflects a medical practice with a diverse clientele, and that the providers here want to know who their patients are. The form has a place for Vanessa to write her legal name and her preferred name. It has more than 2 sex options, and a place to indicate she's in a committed relationship.
Well done.
Thank you. Can I have your insurance card, please? I have to make a photocopy of it. Have a seat. The doctor will call you.
Excuse me, Ms. Shepard? Hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Come on in.
And now the appointment begins. These first interactions with the provider subtly indicate to LGBT patients whether they can be open or need to be guarded. Let's see what happens between Dr. Miller and Vanessa Shepard.
Just to get started, I saw on your intake form that you did not check off when your last period was.
Yes, I'm a trans woman and I don't get a period.
Oh, so that means you've had the surgery then, right?
No, I don't know what surgery you're referring to that would make me get a period.
Okay, so you have sex with men, which would just mean that you're gay.
No, I'm a woman of trans experience and I identify as lesbian or bisexual.
I have no experience treating patients like you. I really think you need to be seeing an endocrinologist and not me.
Well, I only came in here because I've been coughing for 3 weeks.
This is not going very well for Vanessa. Now let's see what an LGBT welcoming provider might do differently.
I see that on our intake form you checked off that you're transgender. Do you prefer to be called Ms. Shepard?
Yes, I prefer to be called female pronouns, please.
Okay, great. So sorry I got it wrong in the waiting room. Thank you for your patience. Do you currently have a healthcare provider who's providing you with your hormonal treatment?
I do go to a clinic, but it's really far away, so I was hoping that I can do everything today here with you.
While I have experience with the LGBT patient population, I've never been the provider of hormones for a transgendered patient. That said, I think it won't be a problem. I've prescribed hormonal therapy to other patients, and as long as you're willing to be patient with me and we work together, I think that should be okay. The other thing before we get into what brought you in today is I always like to remind my patients how important it is to be tested for HIV. Can you tell me when the last time is that you were tested?
Dr. Miller knows that transgender women of color have particularly high rates of HIV infection due to multiple barriers to care and discrimination. And many HIV-positive women have never been tested.
Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, tell me what it is that brings you in to be seen today.
Well, I've been coughing for 3 weeks. What a terrific doctor. This could be the beginning of a long relationship.
As we've seen, a doctor's appointment is a complicated set of interactions with the environment, with forms, and with the healthcare staff. There are many places to get it wrong and many opportunities to do it right.
Yeah, so I really find that video to be very helpful, and I often show that when I'm doing trainings in other areas or other other departments, because I think although, like I said, it takes place in a doctor's office, it's really modeling a lot of the behaviors and certainly a lot of the components that we as Title IX practitioners have to incorporate into our daily work that we do. So I know that we have another question slide here. Nikki, I'm curious what you think. I think maybe we should keep going, take some more questions. I want to make sure we have time to get through all of our content.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
And we'll have some time at the end for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we wanted to, you know, as Emma said, spend some good time talking about the intersection of trauma in the queer community. And this is, of course, what brings us to Spectrum. And we do have a statistics slide coming later, but I think by now we are well aware that there are a disproportionate amount of assaults and violence within this community. So this is something that we wanted to talk about. So one of the very first things is compounding factors. And what we mean by compounding factors is certainly we recognize as Title IX coordinators that sexual assault and interpersonal violence come with a huge amount of trauma. But within the LGBT community, there could be some compounding factors that make this particularly impactful. And that is the way in which somebody identifies either in their gender or in their sexual identity. So we want to be mindful of making sure that we are caring, we are compassionate, and we get the right care in somebody who is compassionate, like we saw with that doctor, and knowledgeable about the LGBTQ plus community. If we have somebody who identifies as a lesbian who may have been assaulted by a male or a male identified individual, certainly the amount of trauma that would be experienced by somebody who identifies as asexual and has had any sort of violence with themselves would be pretty devastating. So we want to make sure when we do our intake process and we are referring our students out to care, that we're sending them to people that recognize that there are multiple factors that play with their identities for sure.
And I would also like to add on, as we're discussing compounding factors, is, you know, thinking specifically about the trans and non-binary community specifically in terms of sexual assault, right? Especially, and we're going to talk a lot about this, but especially regarding body parts, maybe body parts that were fondled or touched, that could be really uncomfortable for many reasons, on top of it being assault, but also because of someone's gender identity and where they are in that process.
Definitely. And that goes, you know, along with the identity certainly of the survivor and the perpetrator. Like those are going to be things that are going to impact certainly the intake form and the providing care and resources that we offer to the student afterwards, and who we choose to send them to we're gonna have to be really mindful in that. Fear and shame in reporting is a huge barrier for anybody when they're looking to report or not report their assaults. So we are definitely want to impress upon you that this could be higher within the LGBTQ plus community, especially, you know, exactly for what we saw in the video with Vanessa, that they are going to be met with somebody who just does not understand their experience, or is going to ask them a lot of questions that are going to be insensitive or guilty, or, you know, making them feel like there's something wrong with them or their identity. And we certainly do want to mitigate that completely, but making sure that our Title IX coordinators and our investigators and anybody who's going to be handling intake forms are up to date and are trained in how to take reports like this, for sure.
But you are responsible as care providers to do what you can to break down those barriers so that your queer, your LGBTQ students and employees feel that they can trust you and feel comfortable coming forward to you specifically, right? To you as a campus, to you and your colleagues. And we hope that some of the things that we discussed in the presentation help you do just that. Perhaps it's not even directly related to Title IX or sexual assault, but the fact that you are doing what you can to establish a more inclusive environment builds that trust amongst the students.
Definitely. Looking at the availability of resources, again, if you're in a community like mine that is very small, resources may be incredibly limited. I mean, I think you can go on the SUNY Saver and look and see where your resources are and who your resources are. And if you could reach out to them and make sure that they have had some degree of LGBTQ plus training. And I know that we're all, don't have an excess of free time, but maybe there's something that we could offer to them to bring them and the care providers up to speed, so that when we do refer a student out, we know that they're getting the absolute best possible care that they can get.
I think recognizing assault is also a huge, huge thing when you're talking about the queer community. I think for many survivors or victims, they might not recognize what has happened to them, might not recognize their experiences as sexual assault or rape, right? And that goes back to our conversations previously about wanting to be mindful that your campus conduct processes are inclusive in terms of the words that you use, right? For so many people, they only think of sexual assault as between a penis and a vagina, right? So they might not realize that this unwanted experience is considered sexual assault and therefore might not want to come forward and report. I think also when you're talking about things like dating violence and interpersonal violence, it's also really important to acknowledge that it might be under-recognized, right? It might be under-recognized by people in their lives, right? Because their stereotypical or biased view of what dating violence looks like is, a cisgendered man hitting a cisgender female, right? They might not be recognizing it between two females, two males, someone who's non-binary, someone who is trans, and therefore they might not be having that reach out or getting that help and support that they need.
We were also talking before this, being able to recognize risky behaviors too within the LGBTQ plus population. We oftentimes use the example of, being at a party or being at a bar and you see a male, walking a very intoxicated female out who, can't stand up, and, I call it the spidey sense goes off and you think there's something that's not right about what's happening. And so, hopefully you confront it. But if we see that happening, maybe with two males or with two females, we might think, wow, that's a really great friend. Girls always take care of each other when they've had too much to drink, kind of thing. And we might not be realizing what's happening could potentially be the beginning of an assault or a negative interaction between the two of them. So
but I think
being able to recognize, yeah.
When you're talking and doing work around bystander intervention on your campus and trainings that you utilize, really take a heavy look at them. Are the examples that are provided really female to male heavy? What does that look like? What can you do to make it more inclusive and really normalize sexual violence and interpersonal violence in the LGBTQ community? Where can you insert examples? Or how can you use gender neutral names so that we don't have to assume the identity of the person or the case study that we're describing or talking about?
It's always interesting when I do it for our students. I will not give a binary pronoun and I'll read it, and then they'll start to debrief it with me and they'll be like, well, when he was leaving the bar, and finally I'll get to the end and I'll say, there was no indication, it was just assumed. And you can see the students kind of processing that and realizing, like, would I have done anything differently if had it have been two people of the same on its face gender. So it's an interesting conversation with your students as well, for sure. So I encourage you whenever possible to do that. Yeah, so now we want to talk about queer people of color and queer and Black Indigenous people of color and how we can best support them on our campus. And we would first, I would like to take just a moment of silence to recognize all the lives that we have seen lost, especially recently, and then what's happening, is particularly impactful right now in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So if we could just take a moment and hold them and their families in your hearts and in your thoughts. Thank you for doing that with us. And it's a really hard time for all of us, I think, who do this work and who hold this work so close to our hearts and have so much passion and compassion for our students that are experiencing pain. One of the first things that we want to do is acknowledge and talk about what's happening in the country right now with your students. They have not only seen a horrific amount of violence within their communities, but they have also been incubated for the past 6 months with just their bubble of people that they've seen every day. So they haven't had the chance to process what's been happening with a larger group in person. I mean, I'm sure that they've done it online and had some conversations, but certainly, and for some of our QPOC and our queer, Black, Indigenous people of color who may not be out or may not have people to talk to and process this, it's really important that we can hold that space and have that space for them to do it comfortably and safely and in a way that affirms that. And for that, that includes for me, using the right words, being able to say Black Lives Matter, and then, saying their names, acknowledging what's been happening, and just being there, but doing that and saying, not, all lives matter. We want to say like that our Black and brown students are coming back to our campuses with worlds of trauma right now, and however we can help, that's what we want to do. So we want to provide training for our campus to be, allies, advocates, and accomplices. That's what our students need right now. They need us, white identifying people, to stand up and to use our voices to advocate and to help them be as successful and be heard and be safe on our campus. And that's, to me, what I feel like my role is to give voice to people who feel like they cannot have their voices being heard right now.
About allyship to the LGBTQ plus community, you have to look at allyship in an intersectional approach, right? Allyship to all marginalized communities, not just the queer community. And that's so integral to the conversation now more than ever.
Yeah, for sure. Doing the work to examine your own privilege, and I put here really examining it. If you're going to sit down and say, I'm going to do this, it is messy, it's hard, it's vulnerable work, and it hurts. You're going to recognize that either advertently or inadvertently, you've had a role in contributing to white supremacy and systematic racism that exists in institutions, and that's a reality, and that's hard to face. But to do your own work, I think, is at the heart of what we're trying to do. And in only holding a mirror up to ourselves are we going to be able to give that back out to our students and to say that we've done reflection and we want to be your accomplice, we want to be your advocate, and I've done the work to do that. In doing this with other white folks, it's not on our students of color, our queer students of color, to educate us. They're exhausted, they're traumatized. This is not their job to do. This is our job to do. There are resources upon resources in which you can use, and then listening. When people speak and they tell you what they need, really, really dig in and listen hard. Examining your activities for the LGBTQ plus students, and is there a space, a true space that our QPOC and our Q-BIPOC students are going to feel like they're comfortable and they're seen, and there's a space for them to come in and interact and to be them, to be themselves. Sometimes I think that it helps to have mixers or events only for these students. I have gotten some pushback when I have done that, but these students need a space and they need to find their community, because the needs that these students have are very different from our white LGBTQ plus folks as well. Do you have any virtual speakers who you could get to do some talks, or local members of the community who would come in and speak to these students as well, looking to host some events that are specifically tailored just for this community? And then solicit feedback from your Rainbow Union or your Pride group or your employee ERG, avoid using the same several students. And I know that, you know, on every campus we have our rock star students who are always willing to be there and always willing to help, but they're tired too. And they're also doing their schoolwork, and they're also, you know, dealing with their stuff. So avoid using the same students for events and programming, and try to reach out for sure. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Emma?
No, but I do want to apologize. There is a bad storm. So if you hear thunder in the background and the rumbling, I'm just apologizing in advance for the extra noise. But just echoing what Nikki said, I think it's really valuable, especially with everything going on, to not exhaust and be mindful of what kind of load we are expecting or putting on our queer, Black, and Indigenous people of color. And I think it's really important to be mindful. We always want to invite students to the conversation, but be mindful of our intentionality.
Right, definitely.
So we know you've probably been to some sessions. You all also probably already know these statistics. I'm not going to go through them, you know, kind of bullet through bullet. You don't need someone to read at you, but we wanted to provide these statistics to provide some context and to remind you of why we all, and I mean we all, you as participants as well, do the work that we do, and why this matters, why these conversations around LGBTQ inclusivity as it relates to sexual assault and interpersonal violence really matters, right? I mean, these statistics are alarming, right? They're alarmingly high, but I think the most alarming piece about all these statistics is that we know that LGBTQ sexual assault, interpersonal violence is underreported at a drastic rate. We know these statistics are much, much higher than what is actually reported. And I think that's really important for you as you're culminating your new processes.
Oh, a note about statistics. These are some things that are helpful, I think, when you're trying to make a case as to why you need your care providers or your, you know, full-time Emma. That's what it's going to be called now, your full-time Emma, or a center, is because this is, you know, when you look at the statistics here, you in there, I don't know if we have one about age, but there is one where there's a lot of assault that occurs before the age of 17 or 18 years old within this community. So our students are coming to us already having experienced some sort of sexual or interpersonal trauma. And I think that that's really important too, when we look at their success in their feeling of being welcome on their campus. If they already are coming in feeling unsafe and they've already come in having experienced some sort of trauma, that we're going to be that space that links them up with the right care that's going to affirm their experience and their identity, and that's going to make them feel safe and welcome. So these are, while you may see them a lot, and I know, shout out to Delcy, who is crushing it on the SUNY's Got Your Back Instagram. If you don't follow it, you need to follow it. You're going to get a lot of these things that are going to help you make a case for why you need more support on your campus, for sure.
And we did cite our source at the bottom, but all those stats were right from the Human Rights Campaign website as well. So our last poll, we love these polls. We want to try to engage you in this virtual way. So which of these organizations do you have at your institution or organization? You can check all that apply.
The anticipation. Woohoo.
Wow, okay, so 62% have inclusive Title IX forms, great, and we're going to be talking about some tips on the next slide of how to make those forms inclusive forms in other areas, and this one can be a little bit tougher to control, right? You have control over your own forms or your own areas, but how can you influence other departments to hop on board? Inclusive conduct language, we'll give you some tips and tricks of that to take back to your conduct folks if that's not your area, and LGBTQ plus trained advisors. Okay, so only 36%. So maybe Nikki and I we can talk a little bit about some tips or pieces of advice about how to get those folks trained, and maybe some things that you'll definitely want to include in that training.
For sure. So making your Title IX processes more inclusive, the first we said is forms. And I think that one of the best things you could do is streamline your intake processes with other areas. So using your form, and through the Student Conduct Institute, they've given a really good model intake form, and looking at that and being able to have, as we said, more than just the sex, male, female, or other, and having a space for somebody's chosen and preferred name, pronouns as well. But making sure, your process, you can reach out to your health center and say, do you also ask these questions? And then, of course, to your public safety or university police department, seeing if they have the same. So when a student goes from one area to another, they're not having drastically different experiences with an intake process.
And I would just say, if this is something you're starting on your campus, I use the very gentle shaming approach. And what I mean by that is, when I was first trying to encourage departments to get on board, I might start the conversation, well, I know our colleagues in the Career Resource Center and the Counseling Center are already including this on this forms. These are my suggestions of how you can modify your forms in your areas to be more inclusive, because students notice, and students will come to me when they say, it was really great that I could list my chosen name on this form with this department, but then I went here and I was really caught off guard because this area isn't being mindful of this. I know we've mentioned a couple of times inclusive campus conduct language, and I want to expand upon what we mean by that and really encourage you to think of all the various areas in which conduct language could appear. So obviously your code of conduct, and there are really simple things, right? Making sure you have gender neutral pronouns instead of he/she, right? Being mindful of body parts, which we discussed, but also what do the templates look like for your specification of charges? When a student is coming forward and is trans and non-binary, what is the language that they're using to describe their body parts, their experiences, if that's something you have to list as part of your conduct process? I think that's really important, making sure, I know we've mentioned this, but making sure your hearing board or your committee knows how to ask sensitive questions around body parts, around sexual orientation. Make sure they're not stumbling over things like pronouns. Going through a hearing or a campus conduct process is already traumatizing for the survivors for so many reasons, but to not have their gender identity affirmed or their sexual orientation affirmed, that's the controllable, right? That's the piece that we can control as practitioners, is we can do what we can to train ourselves and our staffs to change that. We can't take away that trauma for that student, but we can change our approach to how we can better support our students.
Definitely. So you talked about assumptions and mirroring the language as a survivor. Also, making sure, as you said, that our hearing officers, and that we are as Title IX practitioners doing our work to understand queer sex better. So if that, means that you're reaching out to your local Planned Parenthood and you're getting some brochures, or you're reaching out to your LGBTQ coordinators, or your health center, any work that you can do, you're going to want to be, as you do intake processes, too mindful of having a reaction or asking a question that could be potentially inappropriate or providing more trauma for the student. It's not up to the student, is they're disclosing their assault, to also provide us with a sex education lesson. And I think that's really important. We want to be able to take down what they're saying. And if for some reason you need some more context or you don't understand, take the time to look it up, take the time to reach out to your health center or Planned Parenthood, and then come back to the student and ask them. It's not up to them to provide us with that knowledge as well. And then asking, oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
I love presenting virtually. We always cut each other off.
That's okay.
I would just add to that, it's not a taboo topic, right? When you're thinking about queer sex, it's not taboo to want to learn more about this, because it is essential to the work that you do, right? If you're not part of the queer community, if you're not having queer sex, this isn't something that you're naturally going to know about, because it's not taught in high school sex education, right? Most people have a lack of knowledge, college students and professionals in this area, and that's okay. But it will make you more comfortable when students are coming forward to talk about their intimate experiences if you are a little bit more familiar with queer sex in general.
And that too goes with STI and protection. So we're not always going to say like, well, were they wearing a condom or did they use birth control? Because that's not the case, you know, for queer sex. That's not what we're going to be looking at. So making sure that you're up to date again on that kind of information and questions to ask students.
And I really just want to emphasize too, because I think Nikki chose really great language there, you know, using the, you know, like STI prevention or the phrase protection as opposed to condom, as opposed to birth control, right? Trying to choose something a little bit more umbrella term or overarching.
Definitely. And we've talked about LGBTQ plus friendly advisors. And then anatomy, did you want to take that, Emma? I'll go to that.
Yeah, so I think I want to echo this, and we've been saying this a lot. You always want to mirror, of course, the language that folks are bringing forward to you, right? You always want to use the language that that survivor or that student is sharing with you, but just being mindful of how to have more of a gender inclusive frame when you're thinking about anatomy and when you're talking about anatomy. And this might come up especially if you are writing an investigative report and you need to talk about these things, and maybe the student didn't mention it, but you have to mention it. I think that's really powerful. And I won't go through each chart, but just thinking about, you know, upper body instead of breast or chest, right? And just thinking about ways that you can be a little bit more inclusive in that area.
Definitely. Ooh, here we go. Question time.
So, yeah, should we, because I know we wanted to do, we have one more component. Do you want to take questions at the end or do you want to tackle some now, Nikki? What do you think?
Why don't we take a couple and then we can do the end and then we can take a couple more.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll feel free to jump in too. I'm starting to read through some of these. Would it be appropriate to inquire about PrEP? That's a really good question. I think it depends on the nature of, you know, of what the student is sharing. But if you feel comfortable and knowledgeable to know when and when not to talk about PrEP, I think if you are knowledgeable about it, I don't see the harm in having those conversations. You want a student to be safe. I see that there's a couple of questions in here about restrooms and restroom culture and how to make sure that everyone's on board with all gender or gender neutral restrooms. And there definitely are a lot of complexities and some of these are really campus specific. So I'm a little apprehensive to kind of fully answer these questions, but I think it's definitely about establishing a campus culture that really recognizes the importance of these gender neutral restrooms. And the biggest thing I think about gender neutral restroom is trans and non-binary students don't have a choice. They do not have a choice about using an all gender restroom. That is something that they need for their safety, for their comfort, for their identity. Me and my cis privilege, I can walk upstairs and find another female restroom. I have 2,000 other restrooms on my campus that I can use, but that trans or non-binary person doesn't have that same luxury, and trying to convey that message to the campus. Nikki, is there any other questions that you want to?
I did see one that says, you know, especially if they object when it comes to, you know, when there's some religious objections. And I think that would come down to, you know, what the law in your state says, or what your policies on your campus.
What's your affirmative action policy say, or your anti-harassment or anti-discrimination policy? Definitely.
Absolutely. I feel like you can argue things from 2 points. Obviously, you can argue from emotion or you can argue with policy. And I think that, you know, while people may feel heated about something for whatever reason, whether it's religious or not, your policy is always going to win out. And, you know, if you're going to argue from emotion, I would argue back. Like these are human beings. Like people just want to be able to use the restroom. It's not about you, it's for them. And, you know, and that's what it comes down to, trying to, you know, play to somebody's compassion and their kindness to another student. And at the end of the day, like regardless of what the situation is, I think if you ask your campus community, do you want students to feel like they're welcome and that like they belong here and they're safe? People would say yes.
The other question I wanted to tackle really quickly, I'm so sorry to hear Board of Trustees rejected your code of conduct changes to include they, them pronouns. I'm so sorry to hear that. It's hard again to know like where you're coming from, what state, what institution or organization, but I think finding examples of like the hundreds and thousands of other colleges who have they, them, you know, to really demonstrate that this is becoming the norm and this is the importance that we have to do for inclusivity. This isn't a new topic. Most colleges are rewriting their websites and their code of conducts to be gender inclusive with they, them pronouns. So I wish you the best of luck, and I hope it gets approved the next time around. I'm really sorry that you're having that experience at your institution. Is there a resource or document on how to train public safety officers on how to interact with the LGBTQ community? I think there's a lot out there. I think depending on the needs of your campus. Also, I know some, depending on where you are, some like local LGBTQ centers, not ones on campus, right? Ones in the local community might even provide like cultural sensitivity trainings for free. And sometimes you can customize those things. So it might be worth seeing if you can bring someone in externally, if you feel like there's going to be like a power dynamic at play with bringing someone in on the campus.
One of the most powerful things I've seen, not just with our LGBTQ plus students, but also with our students of color, is that our university police department has been very open to having student advisory boards where they can have actual students on the campus who have that lived experience talking to the officers about how to best go about interacting with students of that population. So if your public safety is open to that, and you or someone who works, you know, like in the capacity that Emma and I do can be there to like moderate and help drive that conversation. I always think we sit in so many rooms and make decisions about what's best for students without having students there. So I think that having students being able to share their experiences as well.
Absolutely. So I think we should move on to the next slide and then we can come back to more questions.
For sure, for sure. Oh my goodness, we only have 9 minutes left.
So one of the activities we wanted to do, and this would be something we would do in more of like a conversation or breakout groups if we were, you know, together in person or in a smaller scale, is to give you an example of a case study and have you think about ways that you might handle this using some of the knowledge that we've shared with you in the presentation. So I think because we're pressed on time, Nikki, do you want me to read through the case study really quickly and then maybe we can just hop ahead to some of our general recommendations?
I think so too, because we're also going to give this to you too, because this could be a good tool potentially for you to use to provide hearing advisors training them as well.
Yes, awesome. Okay, so I'll just read through the case study quickly. So you receive a message from one of your health and wellness counselors that a student has disclosed to them that they were sexually assaulted over the weekend. The student, Joe, is a first-year student and was at a party with several of their new friends this weekend at a house that they do not know who lives there or even if they could find it again. They do not drink often, have drank a couple of times in high school, being buzzed once, but never what they consider to be drunk. They stated that they were drinking punch and became pretty intoxicated, guessing that it was strong. They remember pieces of what happened to them, but know that something happened as their clothing was removed, including their binder, which is complex to remove, and that they woke up in the middle of the night in a room that they did not recognize and were very sore in their genital region. They walked back to campus and went to sleep in their bed. After 2 days, their roommate, who has become a friend, went with them to Health and Wellness where they disclosed the assault. Joe identifies as non-binary and asexual, and this would be the very first time that they had any type of sexual intercourse and presented as very distraught to the counselor.
And so as a Title IX coordinator, we would have you, had we not have blown through our time, have had you walk us through how you would assist Joe in their report. Where would you meet with them? Some things to consider. What are some questions that you would ask them to make the situation more comfortable and less scary for them? Walking us through some of the language that you would try to use, and also the language that you would avoid trying to use. What are some important things to note in this case? And what are some best practices that you could share with us in dealing with students around working with non-binary and or asexual students? So Emma and I do have a list of things that we would have considered if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think obviously the first thing is being mindful of the student's sexual orientation and gender identity and how that comes into play in their experiences, right? We know that based upon the information that we provided, we know that the student identifies as asexual. So how might that experience of them navigating their sexual orientation be a little bit different with the assault? Relating to the gender identity, right? We know that the student shared that their binder was removed. You know, recognizing that that might be a much more complex emotional response than perhaps just having a jacket taken off, right? That there are so many levels and so many layers with that.
And I think another thing to consider is, you know, the indicator that the student was wearing a binder would pretty much be indicative that student was assigned female at birth. So should a sane kit be done, this may potentially be the first time that this student is having a pelvic exam, which could, you know, certainly compound the trauma that they're experiencing. Making sure that we're referring to the appropriate resources, which would include the student having a sane exam and working with that care provider, but also making sure that we have somebody in our counseling center or our outside rape crisis center that is particularly astute and compassionate to working with students who identify as not just LGBTQ, but asexual and non-binary. And then, sorry.
we say appropriate resources, and I think the other thing to be mindful of, at least this is my own experience of working with LGBTQ survivors of violence, is they more than likely are so afraid to come forward for all the reasons that we already discussed. It might be likely that they're bringing a friend or support person. I find that my LGBTQ students are much more likely to have their own person there because they're already fearful and they want someone in the room who can advocate to say, no, actually, Joe's pronouns are they, them, right? When that practitioner makes a mistake. So I think being mindful, and if a student didn't bring someone in with them, reminding them that they can have a support person at a future meeting or a future process.
Mm-hmm.
I think working with multiple areas, I think is going to be essential, right? If you are not confident in talking about maybe the medical side of what's happening with the student, making sure you loop in someone who is, right? Using the appropriate resources either on your campus or your community, and having those constantly in the back of your mind, knowing what's available in your community, knowing what's available on campus. So when the time comes and you're pressed for time and you're really stressed about this case, that you know who you can call on for help.
And that's where I would again point for our SUNY friends or anybody in New York State to the incredible resource that is the SUNY Saver website, because it does have LGBTQ plus resources listed on that site as well. And then alcohol consumption, and then being mindful of trans-specific needs. I mean, those two could potentially go hand in hand if the student is receiving some sort of hormonal therapy that does not mix well with alcohol, and just making sure, you know, like the aesthetic needs, you know, the binder, and then medical needs potentially that student could experience as well. Anything else to add? I know we're kind of running through the end.
No, I think that's good. I think we covered it. Should we skip?
We can just include, yeah, we can just include this. So this is a great, I love showing this to students and faculty staff alike, and we'll include this in here. There's 5 tips for being an ally. I'll also include a link. She has another video about privilege that's super cute, and an animated video that helps explain privilege very well for those who may be looking for more resources to show in your trainings that you do.
So thank you all. I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat. I see a lot of great questions. I want to be mindful, you know, of our stop time. I know someone asked what would be the best resource to prepare Joe for the medical examination to avoid further trauma. I think a couple things here. I think it's going to be different if we're talking about like a SANE exam or a rape kit versus if they're just getting like an STI panel done. So I think depending on the medical needs, a lot of times with SANE nurses, or if you're doing something that's 2 a.m. in the morning, right? We might not have a lot of flexibility over where the student goes, but finding out local hospitals in your area, who has been trained, who hasn't. Is there something where you can make sure to send an advocate with the student to the hospital to get that rape kit or SANE exam, or to get that blood work done, or to see the doctor? What are other support services or areas? And I think if you feel comfortable, if you're knowledgeable on the process, to mentally prepare Joe for what they are going to be experiencing, to let them know, this is what's going to happen when you do XYZ, to prepare them. Because oftentimes, and this goes for all survivors, the fear of the unknown can be really scary and really intimidating. And to not know what's going to happen next, especially for trans and non-binary folks who have probably already been mistreated and misgendered by medical professionals.
Agreed.
I'm sorry to have to do this, and sad because I feel like this almost should be like a two-part thing. So maybe we'll get something on the books, because since Spectrum is digital and none of it really matters, we could set something up now. But I want to say thank you both so much. This was incredible and something I actually think we should definitely follow up on. I have been saving the questions in a document for as we kind of move through them. This way, if you two want to take a breeze through them, whatever, see if there's anything that you want to answer, include in your slides once you do share it with everyone. I think that would be great. Emma, thank you for powering through this in a tornado warning. Nikki, amazing as always. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here this evening. This was an incredible day, and we hope that you'll come back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, for our first session of the day and our last day of Digital Spectrum 2020. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.